Well, good morning. I am very, very happy to be back here in Etobicoke Lakeshore to stand alongside Lee Fairclough, who we all know has been working so hard, along with members of her team over the past, well, many weeks now, having conversations, knocking on doors, talking to people about the positive plan that Ontario Liberals have to make sure that our province can move forward in every important way. We know that the past couple of years have been extremely difficult here in Ontario, and that we also know the people of Etobicoke Lakeshore and the people of our province are strong and are resilient. We know that they need help, in particular because of how tough the past couple of years have been. We also know that when you watch the way that the Ford Conservatives have campaigned over the last number of weeks, how they have, I'll say, governed over the past number of months, it's very clearly that they want to believe that people don't need help, that the people of Etobicoke Lakeshore and the people of Ontario aren't still struggling, but they are. Now, over the past number of months, and in recent days in particular, we continue to see deeply disturbing and scary increases in gun violence. We continue to see rising numbers of violent carjackings, many at gunpoint, auto theft, and so much else. We're actually at a point, and I believe this was mentioned by media just the other day, where it's almost like it's become so commonplace that we don't even really talk about it anymore. Or at least Doug Ford doesn't talk about it. But Ontario Liberals want to talk about it. We don't believe that here in Etobicoke Lakeshore or anywhere in this province, you should have the fear that you won't be able to remain safe in your neighborhood, that you shouldn't have to feel like you might be confronted with gun violence, that you might lose your vehicle, again at gunpoint. We also know that the federal government is going to be tabling legislation early next week to address, or at least begin to address, we suspect, the rising challenges that we have as it relates to safety in our communities and fighting gun violence. Now, we don't know what's going to be in the legislation that we understand is coming forward, but what we do know, because we have seen consistently, what we do know is there will very likely be a clear opportunity for provinces and territories to partner with the federal government to go directly towards combating the challenge that we face right now with rising gun violence that is escalating, again, in very, very disturbing ways. Well, here's the other thing that we know. We know, having watched the Ford Conservatives over the past 4 years, that you can be guaranteed, or you can be sure, that instead of stepping up and doing the right thing, instead of stepping up and being responsible, instead of stepping up and partnering with both the federal government and municipalities like the City of Toronto, we know, based on past performance, that the Ford Conservatives will do everything they possibly can to thwart the efforts, to underfund, to not be there as a real and trusted partners. Ontario Liberals, well, we make different choices. I said this weeks ago, an Ontario Liberal government will move forward quickly to partner with the federal government to ban handguns in the province of Ontario. Ontario, under an Ontario Liberal government, will actually lead on the national conversation for a national handgun ban so that we don't see guns coming in from our neighboring provinces into this country. We want that national handgun ban, but we will move forward here provincially. I also mentioned the last time we talked about this particular issue, Lee, right here in Etobicoke Lakeshore, I also said that an Ontario Liberal government would move very quickly to appoint an auto theft task force. My understanding is that in York Region, they've already moved forward to want to go in that direction. We saw a motion passed at the City of Toronto months ago calling for this kind of leadership coming from Queen's Park. And where's Doug Ford? Where are the Ford Conservatives on this issue? Completely silent. Completely silent. That is not the leadership that people need right now. In the province, the Ontario that I believe in, the Ontario that Ontario Liberals are fighting for, we do every single thing we can to make sure that people living in neighborhoods like right here in Etobicoke Lakeshore are safe. We get the guns off the streets. We work with our Crown attorneys. We work with our municipal police services. We work with everybody who wants to be a partner, including a federal government that is committed to getting this right. in order to deliver real community safety for the people of Ontario. Doug Ford makes different choices, as I said earlier, and he often makes, if not always makes, the wrong choice. So in this election campaign, if you want a real plan to confront gun violence, if you want to make sure that you have real safety in your community, there is only one choice, one crystal clear choice to stop Doug Ford from pulling us backwards and dragging us down. And that's the new Ontario Liberal team. A new Ontario Liberal team that includes Lee Fairclough, who will be such an extraordinary champion for the hardworking families of Etobicoke Lakeshore, someone who will be a strong voice at Queen's Park, and the only option right here in Etobicoke Lakeshore to make sure that we stop the Ford Conservatives from moving us backwards. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay. So we have reporters on the ground and also on the line today. So we're going to start with reporter questions from the ground with CP first. Go ahead.
Hi, Nusheen
Morning.
Sapati, Canadian Press. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Good. How are you going to address the immediate need for more doctors and healthcare workers in the north so we don't have situations like the one in Red Lake where the ER had no doctor for 24 hours at one point in March?
Yeah, two concrete steps. So number one, in our plan, the only fair, forward-looking, and fully costed plan that's being offered by any party or anybody running to be premier in this election campaign, we'll do two things. Number one, anybody who wants to pursue their university studies in healthcare, doctors, nurses, and others who is prepared to practice in underserved, remote, and rural communities, including in the north, won't have to pay any tuition. Secondly, we're actually going to increase the cap on seats or spaces at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. We've also made a commitment to make sure that right across Ontario, including in the north, where we've heard about the challenges in this regard, that every single Ontarian can have access to a doctor or a nurse practitioner within 24 hours. Then as part of our broader healthcare rebuilding plan in our public system, we're going to be, over 6 years, hiring up 100,000 new healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, and others. We know, for example, there are 15,000 internationally educated nurses at a minimum living here in Ontario who have the capacity and the desire to practice their profession. They're just being held back by an outdated, old-fashioned credential recognizing, if I can put it that way, system. We're going to clear that up and make sure that we get them out of the bleachers and into communities like Red Lake where we need that help. So those are just some of the examples of how we'll address the shortage. And again, not in 4 years, not by press release, but by actually doing the work that's required. And let me just say in healthcare in particular, standing alongside Lee Fairclough, who did such exceptional work, has throughout her career, CEO of St. Mary's Hospital in Waterloo Region, understanding the needs. You look at her entire track record, she understands very clearly what needs to be done in public health care, which stands in stark contrast to the Ford Conservatives who want to underfund public health care so they can launch private hospitals and prioritize them. That's not the Liberal way, that's not the Ontario way.
How will you also address the underlying systemic issues that have left such severe shortages of healthcare workers in the north in the first place?
Yeah, again, so it goes back to some of the items that I just mentioned a second ago that are in our plan. They're fully costed. So when you talk about saying to somebody who might want to become a doctor or a nurse, look, if you're going to do it, and then you're prepared to go work in Red Lake, as an example, or somewhere else in rural or remote Ontario where we know there's been a chronic challenge, you're not going to have to pay tuition. We're going to make it that much easier for you if you're prepared to go and work in those communities that need the help. That is a very clear targeted support that will go, again, right at the heart of the challenge that we're facing. We've learned also through this pandemic how we can better use technology in new and innovative ways to make sure people do have access to doctors and nurse practitioners, whether you're living in Red Lake or you're living in Thunder Bay or you're living here in Etobicoke Lakeshore. We think that we should be able to draw on those lessons of how we've modernized in some respects through COVID and not lose those lessons as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move to questions on the line now. Over to you, Will.
Okay, just a reminder to reporters on the line, if you could raise your hand using the Zoom function, I will add you to the queue for a question. The first question is Ahmed Al-Bayoumi from News Beyond. Go ahead, Ahmed.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Morning. Good, thanks.
We all saw the really tragic shooting that occurred in a Texas school earlier. Can you speak more on how this handgun ban is going to help make schools safer in the province?
Yeah, so first of all, let me just say, you know, what we saw occur in Texas, what we've seen occur far too often, not just in the United States, but other parts of the world, and including here in Canada, is something that is, there are literally no words that do it justice. It's heartbreaking. It's horrific. I can't even begin to imagine what the families in Texas, like others before them, are going through at this moment, especially given the nature of what occurred down there. I think it's so important in this moment, recognizing that we continue to see escalation in gun violence. I think coming out of COVID, as we get closer, we hope, to the end of COVID. Coming out of this, I think there's a lot of very serious challenges we know around, for example, mental health care. We know people who feel isolated, people who are susceptible for a variety of reasons to a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and hate that they see online. And we also know that we do not have just yet rules in place, laws in place that actually stop just kind of skirmishing or nibbling around the margins or the edges. That's why we need strong leadership. That's why we need a ban on handguns in this province. It's why we need Ontario to step up and lead that national conversation, calling for a national handgun ban. It's why we need a real partner at Queen's Park, a partner for municipalities like the City of Toronto and a partner for the federal government. Instead of doing everything possible to try to thwart or underfund or destabilize, we need a real partner at Queen's Park who says yes to a handgun ban, who says yes to leading on this conversation, who says yes to an auto theft task force, instead of keeping its head in the sand. Right now, the Ford Conservatives don't want to talk about this issue, and for a variety of reasons. I said this earlier when I first announced our plans for a handgun ban. Doug Ford has consistently cozied up to the gun lobby. That's not acceptable anymore. Every single time he and his Solicitor General asked a straightforward question, they always punt it, that it's someone else's responsibility, that it's not a serious problem. But it is. It is a serious, serious problem, with carjackings on the rise, gun violence on the rise, challenges right across the board. It's no longer good enough to have a premier and a government that keeps its head in the sand, that just wants to skate by the difficult conversations. We need real leadership, and that's why in this election, there is a clear choice, both locally here in Etobicoke Lakeshore with Lee Fairclough, and across the board, across this province, Ontario Liberals who are quite determined to address the challenges and the difficulties that we face, instead of pretending that they don't exist. And that's what we will do.
Doug Ford says that tougher gun laws are what is required in the province to fix this issue. I was looking at some mandate letters from the previous government, and the 2017 mandate letter to the Attorney General instructed him to work with municipal, federal, provincial government partners to explore new opportunities to reduce gun crimes in Ontario, considering additional measures to get handguns and assault weapons off the streets.
Yeah.
I know you've probably been asked this question over 100 times, but how can people, if handguns are still an issue in this province, how can people trust your party to fix the issue, and how will your government's position on handguns be different this time around?
Well, in fairness, isn't it awesome that you can actually access a mandate letter from a previous Liberal government, so you know explicitly and clearly, as do the 15 million people who call this province home, you know exactly what the instructions were under a Liberal government? Do you have any clue? And I'm asking this in a very respectful way. Do you have any clue what's in the mandate letter for the current Solicitor General or the current Attorney General? Well, the short answer is no. The shortest answer is no. And why? Why don't you know? Because Doug Ford would rather hide those letters. He's actually taken this argument of his that is so outdated all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. It's the same reason his candidates, for the most part, are not showing up in debates all over Ontario in this election campaign. What's their motivation? What are they hiding? I'll tell you what I think they are hiding, that they have no real plan to confront the rising gun violence that we see. In fact, I think it's worse than that, because we've seen consistently that they want to punt this issue and they want to point the finger of blame elsewhere. I think it's true in trying to privatize healthcare, privatize public education, destabilize everything Ontarians hold dear. So, that's number one. Let's be crystal clear about this. Doug Ford is afraid of letting you know what his instructions were 4 years ago for his ministers, because he knows if that gets exposed, when that gets exposed, he knows that it's going to be a very, very difficult day for him because he doesn't believe in what we as Ontarians and certainly as Ontario Liberals believe in. That's number one. But number two, also consider for a moment, right now, for the first time, I think, well, in many, many years, there is actually a federal government that wants to tackle gun violence head on. That's what's different. That's what's fundamentally different from a number of years ago. There's a federal government that wants to get this right. Do you know what they're asking for? They're asking for a real partner at Queen's Park who understands why it's so important to move urgently right now. And instead of getting a partner, they're getting someone who just wants to thwart everything they're trying to do. Someone who would much rather play to their political base and to the gun lobby instead of doing what we need to be done in this province right now. So those are the two fundamental things that are very clearly different about right now. Number one, you have no clue what's in the Solicitor General's mandate letter or the Attorney General's because they're afraid to show you. And secondly, this is the moment to lead on gun violence because all three levels of government have the opportunity. The other two, City of Toronto, for example, and the federal government, they want a partner, but they also know they'll never have a real partner on this issue and so much else with Doug Ford because he has the wrong priorities and he has the wrong values. That's why he's the wrong choice, and that's why only Ontario Liberals like Lee Fairclough can stop Doug Ford. Just needs your help on June 2nd to make it happen.
Okay, and we have one more question from ONFR that's on the line, but their microphone isn't working, so I'll read it out. Stephen, what's your plan to tackle the opioid crisis?
So, a number of days ago, I was up in Sudbury, Ontario. Well, of course, Sudbury, Ontario. It's an Ontario election. So, and I announced that day standing alongside our candidates, David Farrow and some others, and standing with first responders, professional firefighters from Sudbury. We talked about, in Sudbury's case in particular, how over the past 4 years, there's been a 143% increase in emergency room visits because of the opioid crisis. And this is something that we are hearing across the north. We are hearing about it in Toronto. We're hearing about it in communities all over the province. So there's a couple of things that I announced that day that are part of the Ontario Liberal plan. Again, our fully costed and responsible plan to confront the opioid crisis. Number one, the emergency opioid task force that was originally struck more than 4 years ago hasn't met a single time in 4 years under Doug Ford and his government. Not one time, despite the fact that we see a serious crisis, an escalation, like as I mentioned a second ago in Sudbury, that's beyond comprehension when you think about how scary that situation is. Not one time in 4 years have they met. Now that's going to change. Under an Ontario Liberal government, that emergency task force would be meeting regularly so we can confront the crisis. Secondly, we would lift the arbitrary cap that exists on consumption and service sites, number two. And there'd be significant funding that's included in our fully costed plan to help make sure that those services are real, that they're wraparound services. We would help communities deal with needle debris. We would do all of this around intervention and the treatment. I think there's also a major issue around mental health care and addictions generally, and our plan calls for $3 billion in new funding to confront that kind of at large. And there's also a very serious challenge with housing right now, with deeply affordable housing. People who need more help, who need more services. That's why we've included hundreds of millions of dollars in our housing affordability plan that will literally help build, I believe it's 138,000 new deeply affordable housing units over the next number of years. So there's a series of steps that we've included specifically to confront the opioid crisis. But again, in addition, we would be real partners collaborating with our municipal friends, our municipal partners in governments to make sure that we are able to confront this instead of keeping our heads stuck in the sand the way that the current government is and the way that the current government has. It's not good enough anymore. There are families being ripped apart by the opioid crisis. Obviously, people tragically losing their lives. They need more support. They need more help. And an Ontario Liberal government will move on this urgently.
Okay. And the follow-up is, will you take French lessons, and what is your commitment to bilingualism if you win?
Well, again, if you take a look at our fully costed, fair, and forward-looking plan, you will see that thanks in large part to many of the extraordinary candidates who are running for us, including Lucille Collard and Amanda Simard and many others, there is a very strong and rigorous plan in our platform to help support the Francophone community here in the province of Ontario, a series of steps that we will be proud to take as a government, very similar to the steps that previous Liberal governments have taken. I have taken French lessons in the past. Obviously, French is not a language where I, and so not my first language, of course. I'm not currently taking them, but I've already made the decision I will start those French lessons again. I'm trying to get better in French and more conversant in French. I'm a bit of a work in progress in this regard, and, well, my wife would tell you in many other regards, but we're going to make sure that we get there, and it's something that I think is really important to be able to speak to the community and make sure they understand they have a real ally, not just in me, but in the Ontario Liberal team.
Okay, and there are no further questions on the line. Back to you, Stephen.
Well, thanks very much, Will. Just to close up, as I said, delighted to be here in Etobicoke Lakeshore with Lee Fairclough to talk about such an important issue. How we can make sure that families who live right here in these residential neighborhoods are safe and protected. How we will deliver on a handgun ban. How we will partner with the federal government to make this happen. How we will support cities like Toronto that want help from Queen's Park. How we will appoint an auto theft task force. How we won't keep our heads in the sand, cozied up to the gun lobby the way Doug Ford and his team are. And most importantly, how we will always remind voters there is a crystal clear choice in this election. In order to stop Doug Ford, that choice for a strong, progressive, Liberal government is to vote Liberal in Etobicoke Lakeshore for Lee Fairclough and for Liberal candidates right across this province. Thanks so much.